Or Tony, can you see me on the live stream? Just confirming.
Yes, and I can hear you.
All right, perfect. So we're going to go ahead and get started for today. Welcome to our State of the School. I've got a couple of folks listening in just to make sure that sound is okay. I'm using a new app, so I want to make sure you guys can hear me and I'll see the slides. Or Tony's kind of feedback from downstairs. Are we good in terms of sound and everything with the app?
Yes.
All right. Make sure I'm recording this. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started, everyone. Good evening. My name is Liz Wantour, and I'm the principal here at Franklin. Tonight, we're going to talk about the Franklin State of the School, which is just an update on some of our data, what our strategic plan is for some celebrations, and then empower you with information. We want to frame everything with our vision, our mission. So vision here at Franklin, is just to work with our students to ensure that they are empowered to lead full, purposeful lives as their authentic selves. We do this by nurturing students' sense of artistic self-expression as well as academic excellence. And these are the values that unite us. So arts and creativity, personal excellence, equity, collaboration, and human connection. So tonight, we're going to go over some general things. So the Chicago Public Schools mission and recommitments, which is kind of like, our umbrella. We are part of Chicago Public Schools, so just sharing with you all those district updates. And then we're going to talk a little bit about our school's data, specifically zooming in on our Illinois State report card. And then I'm going to go through and talk with everyone about, we've got some great celebrations with our school data. We still have areas we want to focus on to continue to improve here at Franklin. So we'll end tonight with our continuous improvement working plan, priorities, kind of talking through what that is, and then going over our school goals as well. Hey, welcome. You guys are the only in-person folks here. Oh, come on in. Well, have a seat. We just have these two front tables. We are welcome everybody on whoever's on YouTube. We've got some folks who are joining us virtually. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, so let me make sure, pause everybody. I'm going to pause and make sure we've got a good setup now that we have some in-person folks so that you guys can see the slides. All right. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and roll because I'm starting with it. But all right, so CPS, recommitments, and vision. We're just going over some district-wide stuff. Hey, welcome. Come on up. Yeah, we moved. We had to move locations because we have a special surprise tomorrow that's getting set up in the cafeteria. Yes. And virtually we have more folks that join normally anyway. So, but it's good to see you all in person, right? Okay, so we're Tony. Are we still okay with how the presentation looks on the live stream?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. So we're going to go over just the agenda, which is CPS, mission and recommitments. We're going to talk a little bit about some of our school data, Illinois State report card, and then our continuous improvement working plan is what we'll end with tonight. So might be a review for some of us, but if you haven't been tuning into the LSC meetings, just a good review of some information. All right, so just overall CPS stuff. We are in a moment at CPS where they're recommitting to our mission and vision overall as a district, which is really to provide high quality public education for every child in every neighborhood that prepares them for success in college, career, and civic life. This apple is an infographic that kind of circulates through all schools. The big priorities here are academic progress, operational excellence, and building trust. And as you can see there, those little sub-priorities. Recommitments. So, one of the things that we, focus on working with every single school. They differentiate to the needs that we have as a school. So the three overarching commitments that drive the work are operational excellence, building trust, and again, the academic progress. Instructional core. This is when you cut into that apple. What does that mean in terms of how does that look in the classroom, play out in schools? So really focusing on continuous learning for educators and administrators to support the student, well-being, the teacher in order to make sure they're doing the best that they can for kids. So professional development, those kind of things, and then content. So really making sure that what the kids are learning is standards aligned and quality. And you can see that through some of these initiatives like Skyline, for example, or what we're doing at Franklin, which is focusing on developing teacher instructional practices, those kind of things. And then the core here is focusing on developing every child's sense of pride around their identity, strong relationships with one another, and then a sense of community within schools. So, all right, so now let's talk about some Franklin data. This is the exciting stuff. So I went over this a little bit at the LSC meeting. On the report card, there are different levels, annual summative designations, and every school in the state receives one of these 5. So exemplary is reserved for the top 10% of all schools. And there's no, in order to get this, there have to be no underperforming student groups that fall below the all student group like designation. So for example, where all the state children, like if you think of a student group, you can think of something like students of color, or students that have a learning disability, or students that might be low income, right? So we always disaggregate that data by those different groups that might be historically underserved, so that we can target them more and put more supports where it's needed, or target different leadership opportunities, things like that. So exemplary is, again, high schools, it's tied to graduation rate, but that doesn't really apply to us. Commendable is not a bad rating. In CPS, there was 41 schools that got exemplary. There was a little over, there's 300 or something that got commendable. And so I'll kind of walk you through what that pie chart is for what goes into the rating. And then targeted, comprehensive, and intensive support are typically, those schools that need a lot more help and intervention. So what goes into the rating is, this is our pie. So the annual summative designation has about 75% that are academic indicators. The first one and the second one, English language arts growth and math growth. So that is student performance on the Illinois Assessment of Readiness. It's the one time a year exam. It's honestly an exam that the district has moved away from. We used to do math all the time. That's what we focused on for planning. During COVID, that all went away. And so don't have the contract with NWA anymore. We're focused on using the STAR 360 for the 3rd through 8th graders. But that's not a high stakes assessment. That assessment is only to help teachers plan instruction. It doesn't have any bearings with students getting into different places, things like that. The IAR is a once a year, really rigorous test. So one thing you're going to notice, so think tonight about the difference between growth and proficiency. Growth is measuring each individual student's movement from year to year. So high growth means that regardless of where kids are performing at a grade level or above or below, that they're moving consistently. So we really want to, the pie really emphasizes those things. And I appreciate that just from a principal lens, because I know tests aren't everything. Tests are imperfect. Tests can have biases. Tests can, some kids are good testers, some kids aren't. It doesn't define who a child is, or even who a school is, although it's nice when we do well. So, and then the proficiency, so ELA and math proficiency, the first two, keep in mind, that's only going to be 4th through 8th graders, because in order to measure the growth, they would have had to have taken the test in 3rd. So 1 and 2 are 4th through 8th graders from last year. Hey, welcome. Come on in. We've got some more folks joining us for those of you online. Welcome. You can just have a seat over here. Thanks for being flexible and coming up to Ms. Fox's room today. We have a special thing going on in the cafeteria for tomorrow. So we're booted a little bit because of some preparations. So I won't share too much about what that is. I think you guys know. Right. And I anticipated like a smaller in-person crowd. So that's why I was like, we're going to go to, we did the LSC meeting up here and it worked well. So. All right, so we're just going over this. Might be repetitive for some of us, but we're going over the Illinois State Report Card. So proficiency measures like at or above grade level, right? And those are weighted a little less heavy, so 7.5% for both ELA and math. And those two metrics, 3 and 4, are inclusive of 3rd through 8th grade, so all kids. Science proficiency. Hey, Morgan, how are you? Not right now, hun. Yeah, sorry. Science proficiency is a test that is just 5th and 8th grade. Okay, so 5th and 8th, it's a test we haven't looked at a lot. We take every year. Typically, these tests, we don't get those scores back until like fall. So it is something that is a shift for us. You know, like we're going to start making sure that when we're not going to entirely do everything around the test, but really just kind of understanding where we need to hit certain things at certain points in the year. And then English language learner proficiency is like children who are learning English, how they're progressing on that assessment. And then the 25% is school quality and student success indicators. Chronic absenteeism is weighted very heavily, and that metric number 7 accounts for children who miss 10% or more of the school year. So that one it's not overall attendance anymore, it's those who are that chronically absent. So how much of your population falls into that category? And that is actually one of our growth areas. Our attendance has not been great post-COVID, so we're working on that. Yeah. Climate survey is the 5 essentials, just if you had everybody participate in it. And so that is, it's just participation for that piece. So, all right, so this is the exciting stuff. Our school was rated as exemplary. So we were 92.45, which is the 4th highest score out of like over 600 schools in CPS, and the 2nd highest of all elementary schools. So we were really, really proud of that. And the big thing that I think the teachers are the most proud of is the growth piece, like knowing that, you know, coming out of COVID, we've recovered a lot. Now within this metric, I'm going to kind of go and break it down for how we compared in terms of like to other schools. And so if you see here, one thing to also note is the academic indicators. You have to have at least 20 kids to be able to have something count. So that ELA proficiency piece, that's not a metric for us. They take it and they divide it evenly amongst the 5. So science, ELA, math, all of these. All right. So now this is school-wide numbers. One of the things so out of all of our students for ELA and math growth, these 2 charts show where we line up in terms of like other schools throughout the state. And so what you'll see is that we are growing students in math a little quicker than we are in ELA, although it's still a huge win that we have seen this much growth school-wide. Some of the growth areas that we have, though, is when you start to break this down amongst like some of our subgroups, so like students who might be low socioeconomic status, students who have an IEP, students who, looking at students of color even. So we still have the achievement gap at Franklin. So that is something that this does not actually represent here. Although when you look at those metrics, we are still well above where the state average is. In a moment, I'll kind of show you, if you guys want to at the end, how you can go and manipulate the data on the state report card. It's very interactive. So you can always explore that and look at different subgroups and things. Yeah, it's pretty easy. Yeah. And so then when we look at ELA and math proficiency, we've got, again, doing really well in terms of overall. Now, the thing here is we're at the 100 percentile, but even thinking about like achievement, like our achievement school-wide is it's just over 50% at or above in ELA on that exam. And then about like close to 40 on math. The metric itself, again, it's a pretty tough test. And it's really something we're going to start unpacking a lot more to see like what's that rigor level, because even though we're growing, we still want to even up the amount of kids who are attaining. So this is proficiency. We're above average, but the place to grow is to continue to see more kids meet that meet or exceed on this really fun test. All right, so tomorrow we're going to be sending home score reports for y'all to take a look at. This is a sample of a map. So when these come home tomorrow, something to note is that there's several different sections. So A, if you look at that little A with the circle around it, that is the just general student information. B is the name of the assessment. So you guys will be getting ELA and math. C is a really good resource where you can look to get some more information about even how to read the report or what it means. D, again, just more information for the teacher. The thing that I think is really useful for parents would be like E, F, and G. G is nice. So E kind of shows you where they might fall in the state average. And then G is nice because both on literacy and math, it will give you all a quantile and a lexile score. So lexile being what level of complexity does my kid read at? And then quantile, the same but for math. And there's some resources that you can look at on those websites. It's just like a natural measure. And then, yeah, student growth percentile, it'll have that information for you. And then on the back, so the back side is further to the right, you can go through and it'll show you just different areas to focus on with your child. So, again, these only come out once a year. So these are not like you get a BOY, BOY, BOY. All right, and yeah, that's just the IAR test they just spoke about. Again, where we're at with math, still doing really great compared to everybody, but some ways to work on proficiency. You know, we're competitive against ourselves in this moment. We are in the top in terms of how many kids are scoring in the proficient area on the science assessment. We don't look at growth for that one. And then, as you can see, our growth area is listed here. The bottom chart is chronic absenteeism. So we got 70 points for that one, which isn't horrible, but we would like to have that be kind of higher up on the comparison. And then the climate survey, that again, that's kind of an easy one to get because we just make sure our kids take it every year. That survey is really good, not just for student information in terms of like perception of the school, but or climate. It's also really good to look at for parent and teacher information as well, since everybody takes that assessment. iReady data share. So what the report card doesn't show you is the primary data. At the bottom of the report card, it says that that's going to be a metric coming up soon they're going to look at, but I did want to include some overall school primary data. This is just from last year, all levels K-2 for literacy and math. As you can see, a lot of growth. One of the things that we like to see is not just looking at the green, but even those who are moving out of the lower grade levels, moving into the yellow. So we're seeing a lot of that in reading more so than in math. And that's a general trend school-wide, is in math we're just slightly underperforming compared to reading. That also falls in line with like where the state is at too. So I think it's just a trend overall. And we've got some things we're doing to really look at and combat some of those things, those issues we got. All right, I showed you all the great stuff. Now I want to talk about, these are things to celebrate, but it's still, we have a lot of ways to go in terms of our continuous improvement. So let's talk a little bit about some of our growth areas, focus areas, and what our plan for the next 3 years is going to be. So continuous improvement working plan. So this was a long process with many stakeholders. We started off back in the spring by having some focus groups. We wanted to really get an authentic diagnosis of where, not just where the data is showing, but like talking to families, talking to teachers and students to see what are some of the needs that we have as Franklin. And so we did things like the instructional leadership team analyzed some data. We did surveys, staff feedback. We did a lot of student focus groups, and then we did consensus building protocols. We worked, this probably was like, I want to say like 30 40 hours of work collectively with folks. And it was during the summer, during the spring, even moving into the fall, like getting all the action plan ready and cemented. And so looking here, this is kind of like the process that we went through to help diagnose these we did not have the report card information when we did this. Report card information was just released. So we were looking at things like, we did look at IAR, but not until later in the summer, because that wasn't released until July. We really looked, the data we looked at a lot was the iReady and the STAR 360. All right, so we started out by getting the team together, parents, teachers, students, and that was our team. We reflected on like a big rubric. It was called the school, it's like foundations. So just different indicators and school success areas we could select that we needed to do better in. We did root cause analysis. We developed some theories of action, which is just like, if we do this, then theoretically this should improve. And then implementation plan for each priority, goal setting, and then going through the LSC, having that aligned to a budget. This process was a little, so you're supposed to align your plan with your budget. The budget was spring, the plan was due in September. So, in terms of like budget, what we knew was that we wanted to invest heavily in teacher development. So we knew that. We finalized partnerships and things like that over the summer when we could kind of see the direction of the CIWP. And this is a live document. It's never, just because we voted on it, it can always be updated, checked in on, things added, removed. It's fluid. And so let's look at, this is like the rubric. So the different areas that we could look at and assess ourselves and self-reflect were curriculum and instruction, inclusive and supporting learning. Those are both the instructional core parts, connectedness and well-being, post-secondary success, which for us kind of is more for high school. Like if we were talking about that, it'd be like getting into high school or getting ready for like career readiness, exposing kids to careers. And then the last one being parent or partnerships and engagement. So not just families, but also community partners, things like that. All right, so we have landed on these 3 priorities to focus on in the upcoming school year. So the first one being culturally responsive practices, the second one being mental health and well-being, and the third being the instructional core, and MTSS, short for multi-tiered systems of support. Multi-tiered systems of support. So that's like thinking about how do we reach kids at all different levels. All right, so I'm going to read the slide. I apologize. These theories of action are very like wordsmith with the big group. So it's words that we're proud of. But this first piece here, instructional core and MTSS, if we focus on strengthening our instructional practices, starting with tier 1, moving towards tier 2 and 3, then we see an increase in the implementation of research-based instructional strategies, student engagement, and student ability to identify and develop their own personal strengths, which leads to an overall increase of students who are designated as on track, who are meeting and exceeding grade level expectations on state assessments, and who are meeting their personal goals for entering high school of their choice. So the key thing to really highlight here is that first paragraph. So strengthening instructional practices, starting with tier 1, then moving to tier 2 and 3. So tier 1 is universal instruction. What does every child have exposure to, whether it's with content or strategy teachers are using in the classroom? And then moving towards tier 2 and 3, when we say moving towards, it's kind of like both are moving at the same time, but really naming out, it's important to focus on that universal piece first, and with a lot of intensity, because when we start to think about how are we differentiating and meeting the needs of kids who might need intervention or even acceleration, we want to make sure that there's a strong core of instruction. So some of the things that we're doing with this particular priority is looking at the practices that have to do with this thing called Marzano is an educational researcher, and we have this year invested a lot of money in sending our teachers to some professional development in terms of like meeting with other schools, cross-pollinating, but also getting that, it's like 2-day workshops 3 times a year. We're piloting this with our middle school team. The goal with this development around Marzano's is that we as a school select and develop like a design instruction. So like something that we say in every classroom at Franklin, you might not see the same content and it might not even look the same, but teachers are doing this collection of research-based instructional practices. And so right now, in this particular year, we're just learning about it. We know you guys are slow to go fast when it comes to change sometimes. And so really building and focusing in middle school, piloting that out, and then letting our instructional leadership team really take the lead on what do we want to define as instruction in Franklin. So, and then the tier 2 and 3, hey Valera, how are you? So tier 2 and 3 are really thinking about not just interventions, but how do we also ensure that our kids are getting challenged. So, we have a lot of focus on, there's new things happening at Franklin in terms of acceleration. Some families may have gotten some notifications about, like, the district is now mandating that we offer single subject or whole grade acceleration to families to children who qualify. And they look at the IAR test, and they also, there's a whole host of other things too, but they start with that IAR. Now that is Illinois, is based off of legislation. So now the challenge that we have as a school is that we already have some systems of acceleration that we plan to not just maintain, but also expand on. I think when we think about, like, we have Math Explorers, we're going to keep that going in years upcoming, but now we have to look at literacy too. So what does that look like? When is the best time for that to start? We have, so it's a teacher team that's working on that this year. It's a committee, it's literacy and math enrichment committee. And the challenge that we have is thinking about not just offering acceleration to those kids who qualify, but how do we meld, like, the state structure now, like and that's not that many kids. We only had about 16 kids this year that qualified for that. And so we service much more when it comes to the Math Explorers program, and even next year we're able to hire somebody for that, even expanding that out. So one of the things that is really important to me is gathering teacher voice and input, and then also parents really care about that a lot. And for good reason, especially in middle school, there's research that shows that do those practices in a thoughtful and equitable way, that it's great outcomes for all kids. So really with that, the challenges that we want to also evolve through are having it be something that kids also have some say in as well. So I think not just having teachers select, but also kids selecting, and then encouraging kids who might not normally elect to be in something that's really challenging or difficult or accelerated, really encouraging in a thoughtful way to do that. And then within the intervention, we've got a really great resource in terms of our interventionist mom, but we've been moving around based off of, like, where the data says that that's doing the most. So this year we actually have her working with middle school, but thinking about, there's in other areas too. So if we have that strong tier 1 instruction, the strong core, where is the support needed in addition to that to help with our kids who might need a little bit more intervention? So really being smart about how we staff for that and how we define those roles. I think that's, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I'm missing with this one. I think that is it for now. There might be some questions that you guys have at the end. Barrera, anything you want to chime in on with this one? Yeah. All right. Oh, there was one thing I missed. So thinking about our diverse learner program. So, that's one other area in the school where, when we think about equity, which is one of our priorities, that's one of the areas that we want to look at through the lens of equity. So how are we identifying students to be, to have to, if they need some extra support, moving into things like having an IEP or 504, how do we refine those systems that we have in our school to make sure that all students, regardless of either neurotypical, non-neurotypical, are being challenged and supported. So moving to a more inclusive model of special education. All right, next one, mental health and well-being. If we create consistently implement routines to social, emotional, and support. Then we see a safe and supportive school culture, which leads to students exhibiting authentic leadership, pro-social skills, kindness, empathy, integrity, etc., in a social and academic settings and a deeper connection to their school community. So, when we talk about social emotional learning, we can think about it the same way we do regular instruction, which is like, okay, there's tier one, everybody gets it. And there's also interventions and support needed. And so we have focused here in this particular category and goal around developing teacher teams that can support. So we have a culture and climate team now, which supports with the implementation of things like we just started the Positivity Project this year in middle school, which is a character development program. And so they're supporting with things like that. We are also supporting, recently we've had, we're shifting to do some enrichment into that curriculum, looking at, I've got some of my seed folks here, like developing student seed, and having some, which is basically just like an identity, social justice kind of curriculum that we want to teach our students. And then also thinking about, for kids who might need more support with mental health and well-being, like kids can't learn if they don't feel safe when they come to school, and so thinking about if they might need some additional support, we partnered with some different partners who can do like counseling in school, and continuing to develop out those systems that we have. So not just having clinicians to be able to help with support, but community partners and teachers, and then just other support in the building. So really a big focus there. Our last priority, culturally responsive practices. So this one here is focused around the need comes from when we run the CIW process, not just looking at some of our data where we do see that achievement gap that exists, but also listening to our students and our families. So we have a beautifully diverse school here at Franklin. And so it's natural that issues that are involving things like equity, focusing on culturally responsive practices in the classroom as a community. It's natural those things are going to come up. And in education, we know that this is a huge lever to be able to dismantle some of those systems of oppression that exist in our world. And so we want to make sure that everybody has a common language around these kind of practices. So if we focus on building, the statement here is if we focus on building educator knowledge, behaviors, attitudes, and skills in a culturally responsive, research-based instructional strategies in all academic areas, including fine arts. So when we talk about culturally responsive practices, it starts first with like mindset of educators. And so, that's where we're starting in our development. Then we see more inclusive practices, improved sense of student and staff belonging, and greater cultural awareness, which leads to positive academic outcomes for all of our students, including those who are historically marginalized. So some of the things we're doing here, we have, again, that investment in professional development. We're partnering this year with Diversity to Inclusion, which is a fantastic adult educator / consultant who helps us with our own reflective practices around this, like we call it DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging work. We also have really invested in starting some parent groups like our C group, which you guys all know about, and also thinking about not just developing educators, but empowering them to look at critically systems in our school. So we have a diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging committee, which is across it's teachers and parents who sit on that committee. We've got some in here who sit on the committee. Thank you for joining us. And we are working on currently engaging our school in what's called an equity audit. So similar to the CIWP process, looking at the different domains and areas of our school, self-assessing, and really organically deciding together like what area we want to tackle first. I mean, there's so much in schools that can be that has like a view of like old kind of antiquated practices that are great for all kids and for certain groups. And so, we look at things like, well, in the questioning, we're looking at things like, okay, mission and vision. We look at things like, what about our, like, K to 12 or K to 8, what are we looking at? What kind of windows and mirrors do we provide for our students? There's things like grading practices, discipline practices. One of the big pieces of data that we noticed as a school when we were looking at our CWP was that we were disproportionately having higher levels of office referrals for our non-grade students. And so that was really, that was a hard thing to swallow when we saw that. That's something that really we all have to step back and kind of think about, okay, what are our systems? What kind of biases might we have? Like just thinking through the whole thing. So, it's hard work, and it's not necessarily comfortable work, but it's necessary work. So, all right, now let's talk about our school goals. So, the numbers you're about to see, I showed you all the nice, great accomplished numbers of this report card, but these numbers here are ones that are the ones we want to keep improving, right? So the biggest, heaviest chunk of work is around that instructional core. So you'll see there's a lot of goals under that because we're looking at a lot of different metrics. And then the mental health and well-being and culturally responsive practices, we're looking at things like office managed behaviors, culturally responsive practices. We're looking at on-track data. I don't want to go too much in the weeds, but I do want to tell you about what that is. On-track is grades and attendance. So those are things, one thing we have a lot of control over, and one thing we have not a lot of control over. So grades being the teachers have the autonomy to assign students. We have a collective kind of agreement with an admin and teachers about how we do that as a school. And then attendance is something that we have to think about. That might be an indicator of school culture. And so thinking about that data, we think really will be very authentic in how especially when we disaggregate that and look at the different groups, are we actually moving the needle for our kids when it comes to all this training we're doing for our staff? And then the 5 essentials is our survey that I told you guys about, the culture survey. Teacher collaboration was really low on there, and we were all kind of surprised on that. We generally, work a lot with each other. So really this year also focusing a lot on teacher leadership and having intentional times where they can meet with each other, not just in grade level teams, but even above and below grade levels to get some kind of cross-pollination with what we're doing in our classrooms. The way we structure ourselves in school is sometimes it's hard to do that. So, all right, goals. So when we look at the iReady, those are the top 2 categories. That's our K to 2 students. So the goals here that we have are the end of year testing. So here we ended last year at 56% of our students at or above grade level in ELA, 47 at or above in math, and gradual increases here. I think that we saw a huge bounce back after COVID, after the learning loss there, but we want to make sure that we are realistic, and then in 3 years, we can get all the way up to those really high levels of proficiency on those assessments. Something to think about though is that the alignment between these assessments and our Illinois Assessment of Readiness. What I have heard, and what we look at, the sample items from the IAR are a lot easier to get a hold of than the STAR or the iReady. But again, into the iReady and the STAR are both really meant to be screeners. They don't really get to that deeper level of knowledge that the IAR does. So when we're thinking about our continuum of assessments, the IAR is the tough one, right? The one we want to dissect more. Percentage of 3rd through 8th graders. So the second 2 below that on the ELA, we were at 61% at or above in ELA and 55% in math. By the end of a 3-year cycle, we want to get that up near the 80s, so 85% for ELA, 79% for math. And then within the Illinois Assessment of Readiness, this is where, when you look at our report card, the story that doesn't show is that proficiency piece. So remember I had told you earlier the difference between proficiency and growth. Even though we were at 33% at or above, as defined by the AAR, when you look at that, that kind of gives you a sense of how that test is being used and how kids are responding to that across the state. So you see we were 33% at or above. And when you go back and actually look at where we were at with the proficiency, we were in the 100% percentile. So a lot of kids are not doing well on that math test, which is why I like to say, like, listen, a test is not everything, but it's something to actually use as a tool, right? So we were scoring far above where other schools were, but then when we actually look at the proficiency piece, we want to keep growing there. So within 3 years, getting up to 70% and then 80%. And so think about that too when you see your kids' test scores coming home, okay? Because if somebody's not quite at that meet or exceed, not the end of the world. Use both. Like you've got your STAR data, you've got your kids' grades, you've got your children's. You're about to have the IAR. Like it's a whole host of things that gives you a picture. And no one thing I think is more valuable than the other. It's a different way of looking at it. All right. So the mental health and well-being metrics and goals. We want to reduce the amount of office managed behaviors. So those are like levels, like high level stuff that comes to the office. Last year, we had 140 of those, but 66 of them were not technically office managed behaviors. They were just sent to the office. So we have put some systems in place for teachers to help support, like, okay, this is something, we can come to your room and help you with it, but we don't want to be sending kids out to this instruction to just come and sit and be in the office. That's not restorative. We want to support, de-escalate, but we don't, there's even legislation now about like timeout, right? So we don't want to be sending kids out of the room, and focusing on culture will help with that, but also like policies when kids make mistakes, how to use those as learning experiences. So by the end of 3 years, this year's a big jump. We're going from 140 to 60 is the goal for this year because we have the systems in place. A technical change here, not necessarily like an adaptive long-term thing, but then keeping that moving by the end of 3 years, 38 by the end of the year. And then yearly attendance percentage. So 94.1 was our overall attendance where we ended last year. 95 is what the old metric that, remember we were like level 1 plus or what have you. 95 was what you could get for the highest amount of points on that metric. So we want to get to 95 this year. We're starting to come out of COVID. We have an attendance committee. We have incentives. Like I think on this Friday, we're going to do a bucket dump for all those who have perfect attendance plus one target. Is it one target, Barrera? So Barrera, we're going to go, the kids who have perfect attendance get to go like dump water on the principals. So myself and Barrera are going to take one for the team to try to incentivize kids to get that perfect attendance. And then moving up eventually by the end of this strategic plan to that 96, which is just really strong. And we've been there before, right? Like pre-COVID, we were there. It's really tough nowadays because you don't want to encourage families to come to school if they're sick, but or take vacations, like when, those kind of things, whenever school's going on. Take vacations for sure, but, not during school. And then, so yeah, those are our metrics for those two. And then culturally responsive practices. So the big piece here is the on-track index. So remember that was the combination of grades and attendance. When you look at our data, the achievement gap is really, when you look at all of the metrics, it is there and present. But the one that I feel like that we as educators have a lot of control over because of the grades is the on-track. So that's why we selected that. 50 is the highest amount of points you can get on that. So the idea for us is that by the end of this cycle, we're at 45. I anticipate that metric being on the report card in years to come. So I'm pretty sure there's a lot of research around on-track coming out of the University of Chicago that all schools in Illinois are starting to look at more. And so I can't say for certain, but I do anticipate us going in that direction. And then with the teacher collaboration, the questions under that section of the survey really lend themselves a lot to like folks being vulnerable with one another, like really pushing each other's practice. So thinking like, okay, if we're going to move our kids, we also need to make sure the adults feel comfortable having these kind of like conversations with one another that are more difficult when we talk about biases and things like that and structures in schools. So we did set that as a metric as well for this one. All right, and I will end with saying that success is this, right? Like, so all of those plans can be, it's laid out in a way that it's like straight shot to the top. But we know that, especially in schools, what it can look like is a lot of squigglies in between. And so really making sure that this is the best laid plans and work of our community, but understanding that sometimes we might need to shift and pivot to make sure that we're responding to the needs that come up. So confident that with this group of educators and with this community, we're going to keep rising to the top. Just understanding that sometimes it's not a straight line. Yeah, that is it. That's all I've got for you guys. So I've got some time for questions. If you guys have any, folks who are on the YouTubes, I don't have a way to take questions from the YouTubes, but maybe some of our folks who are here in the audience can, if you guys have any that might be on the minds of others who are listening remotely. Any questions? All right.
I'm curious to know what you attribute some of the growth to. Like, if there are particular things that you think happened to create such a massive growth, because it's great. When I was in Harvard, it looks like there was great growth even before COVID.
Yeah.
So what do you think?
So there's a lot. I think the big piece is coming off of COVID. It was huge. That first year we focused a lot on culture and learning and stabilizing everything. When kids came back, that first year coming back, we did not have a lot of instructional initiatives because it was all about, making sure that school was running smoothly. It was making sure the classrooms were warm and welcoming, that the kids were okay. And really, we were also in the implementation year of our new, I do really think that a lot of this is we've shifted to a vertically aligned curriculum that's standards aligned and culturally responsive. And it was just moving from having, prior to me, there wasn't as much in the literacy realm of having okay, we're all going to be teaching a similar scope and sequence. Of course, teachers have autonomy to kind of change that up, but I think the new curriculum adoption with Skyline and literacy, for sure, we're moving towards a more compacted curriculum for math, because the goal here is also algebra for all by 8th grade. So next year, 8th graders should all have access to an algebra course and all have access to taking the algebra test. So curriculum is one. A focus on last year was interventions. So when you think about, there's a program called Branching Minds, and it's a way that we were able to organize teachers to organize themselves to think about, okay, who are those groups of kids that I'm working with? What are the actual skills and strategies we're going to use and track over time? And if it doesn't work, how do we adjust? So being more strategic and targeted with instruction in small group, as well as just, overall. So I think just the shift back to focusing on instruction. And so there's things that when I saw that growth, I was like, oh man, I can't wait till this year because we're doing even more, right? So there can always be an implementation dip because we are trying some new things. But I think having our interventionist was also pretty key. We enroll a lot. We have big classrooms here, and if I could, I wouldn't. We have a really seasoned staff. And so in order to support that, we do have to, with student-based budgeting, keep classrooms pretty large. But something that helps to relieve that during literacy and math, especially in the younger grades, the research shows younger grades, smaller class size has a bigger impact. But even last year in middle school, we had structures where teachers would have time to leave their room, work with small groups, and have somebody else in their room helping to work with them. So that was something, curriculum alignment. And then I think still focusing on not putting culture on the back burner. It's not perfect. It never was, but putting that, leading forward with before kids can learn, we got to make sure they feel safe and supported. Those first couple of years after COVID, I think was for sure the right move, because now we're seeing gains on the other end, and we have a good foundation to continue to grow from.
You mentioned when you are doing looking at hiring additional support, one of the things this is massive growth across the board. The racial gap grew.
Yeah.
And so the intervention everybody did well, everybody grew, but the white kids grew more. Like when you look at, when we talk about the growth versus proficiency, like looking at proficiency. So I wonder, when you mentioned, like, is there any room to get another person on board, and is that, like, what do you look at? Because it seems like that's the place where the growth really needs the intensive focus is what's going on with the IEP students and the low-income students and the BIPOC students who are not seeing the growth to the degree that the white students maybe aren't.
Well, and I think it's also important to name out too that when you disaggregate for socioeconomic status, that is really where you see a lot of the common, like, yes, students of color, but also socioeconomic status is a big player in that as well. So in terms of like where we land, like we're still pretty well above the state average in terms of growth in those subgroups and have consistently been increasing. But to your point, the rate is still there. The separation is still there in terms of, the achievement gap. And so when we think about how are we going to fix that? I mean, that's a nationwide, right? But think about Franklin, what I believe is, again, going back to the diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, common language across the board. We all need to get on the same page with that as adults. And I think that this partnership is a really good, again, it's a long-term thing, but it's very important that we spend intentional time on that norming as a staff. So first, being able to have those kind of conversations when we're sitting in team meetings and looking at the disaggregated data and taking ownership as educators, like what do we do differently in class? Not what the kids or families do differently, but what do we have within our remote control? And then thinking about how are we providing and encouraging access to rigorous things. So again, going back to like our acceleration program, like a lot of our kids that come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, like they may not elect to do that naturally. And building kids, building their confidence and how they see themselves in school is really like where we start with that. And then we get them into trying out some of that more rigorous thing. And then when we think about the other end of it, when children are diagnosed with like a learning disability, how are we doing that, right? Because we have a clinical team here, great team of diverse learner teachers, but we want to make sure that we're not quickly jumping to diagnose or to give a child an IEP too quickly. And that's where it comes back to strong tier 1 instruction, because that's one way that we can lower the bar for a lot of our students. And when you look at our diverse learner program, it's largely disproportionate for students of color in that program versus non-students of color. So like that's a big important look. Oh, I don't know. Okay. Anyway, that's something to look at too for the system. And then again, discipline is another system, grading is another system. So I think about how we grade students is, like the way that we designed grading back in it's an old system from like the 50s, right? And we used it to kind of decide based off of this agrarian culture, like who's going to go, work on the farm or work in the factory versus who's going to go to school. And we have to look critically at how we still do those things in schools because there's still, like I said, a lot of residue of those old systems. And then with discipline, the restorative piece is really important, focusing on relationships. There are connections to like how we discipline in school and the school to prison pipeline. And, when you over discipline and don't have that relational approach to it, then you can disproportionately affect how a student feels accepted in school, which then affects their learning. And so, really thinking about through that lens as well. Restorative practices is something that I think we need to do more work in terms of not just like educating our students on what that is, but even parents too. I think sometimes there can be like a misunderstanding of restorative practices, too fluffy, or all we're doing is talking, or and there's a lot of different approaches, or that there's no consequences. Like there are consequences to restorative practices. It's just they're logical. Like it connects back to the harm that was caused. How do we teach kids to repair the harm?
Right,
and center the community on relationships. So
yeah.
those are a couple of my ideas with how to solve the achievement gap. Again, like we need to monitor, right? Like this is not something that's going to solve it. So it's encouraging to see the growth that we've seen, but that is for sure an area that we have the power to overcome in Franklin. Like we've got great educators, we have super supportive families. Our kids are amazing, you know. So I think that's one of the really exciting parts about our school is that, yeah, it's a challenge everywhere, but we have the resources to really do something about it.
I have more questions, but I don't know.
Yeah.
You mentioned the narrative is not wanting to like put like so easily quick to jump into that. The terms you used earlier was neurotypical, and I'm curious to know if that conversation we have, like, how do you define what neurotypical is, and then what tools are teachers given to learn how to engage people who maybe don't fit into an IEP, but also aren't necessarily how to define neurotypical.
And that's where research-based instructional practices come. Because when you have that strong, like universal approach to learning, everything, and not everybody's doing the same thing. Kids can choose how they show their understanding. You know, there's different ways we differentiate by content. So like what are the kids getting? Process. So like how are they engaging with that? Or on product, how are they showing their understanding? And so really we have to think about like going back to the tier 1 piece, like bolstering that, because there's still pockets where we may want, classroom, everybody's doing the same thing, right? And that's not necessarily always a bad thing, but if it's happening all the time, it's not great, right? We want to make sure we're differentiating to all learning styles, but that takes a lot of development of your educators too. And, you can't just hire only people. Like we have fantastic educators. We've got some of the best here at Franklin, so it's about building that internal capacity and really supporting teachers, for everybody that we get that's new, we want them to commit to Franklin. We don't want to keep, we've got a below average, or above average. Our retention rate's right for teachers comparatively across the board. But even as this year, like we are going to have some retirees and making sure that new folks we get in, the job force is changing in education. You're not getting, it's a different hiring atmosphere is, and we've been really lucky here. So making sure to continue to develop teachers in tier 1 practices. I kind of got off there though. What was the original question?
Well, I think you hit on basically like acknowledging like how are we defining neurotypical? Yeah. Because it's so often it's like, well, they're able to do the work, but you're talking about having that the instruction that is flexible to the different ways of learning, which might not fit into an IEP, but maybe it does, and how that's included. But what you were saying kind of tied back to one of the questions, like, is that something that you're looking at hiring and others? Because you mentioned the class sizes, and that was one of the things that I noticed is that our class sizes, our class to student teacher ratio is larger than a lot of other schools. Yeah. And so I'm wondering how much that creates stress on the teacher to be able to support the, well, they may have great curriculum to be able to engage, like if there's disruption and, the student needs additional support. Or a group of students need some additional support rather than just send them to the office. Like, is there somebody who's going to come in and be able to just or so what I will say, well, what I will say is that I prioritize positions. Like I think the more people we can get in, the better. Given budgetary climate, never it's all based on budget. I mean, if I can have a reading and a math specialist, I would do like that. But you have to think too about like all the other positions and getting creative in schools. So like one thing we've done this year that we've invested in is our residency program, which, is something that it can be both seen as an honor, but also like a help, right? So our teachers, we have 4 teacher residents this year, and my wonderful resident principal is downstairs. So having
And that also creates a pipeline too for any kind of hiring you might need, right? But with the residents, having them in classrooms, when you have a resident, I mean, I could say this from the lens of like having a resident principal, it's somebody different with a new set of eyes. It always helps you to, they might be learning, but you're also kind of, they're in school and you're learning from them sometimes too. So I think having that program, which also in the upper grades helps to relieve some of the class sizes, like in Miss Wilson's class, and that was a very low investment, y'all. Like we didn't have to pay for that, but it was a fraction, like a fifth of what an actual position would cost. Maybe a third, or not a 3% of what an actual position would cost.
Yeah.
And so having them in the classrooms and regularly partnering with them will help with some of the class size relief. We do have assistants in K1 and 2. We do have, we got kind of dealt a tough hand at the beginning of the year because we had an MTSS coordinator / case manager who decided to go back in the classroom, which is completely fine, but transitioned to a different school. And so, Superwoman Herrera and Montour have been like doing that again. Like we're both case managing, but the idea is that that role is another person that can help with interventions as well, right?
Yeah.
So at Franklin, our case management, we don't get allocated a case manager because we don't have enough IEPs. So we actually budget for that, but also make the other part of the role something that can help with relieving class sizes. So, it's a challenge, and I don't, because on one hand, like I do value really seasoned teachers. I think that who you put in front of your kids is really important, and we're really blessed here at Franklin. But the challenge with that then is, seasoned teachers have rightfully so, like higher salaries, so a higher cost to a school. So we have to, and with student-based budgeting, where our school budget is based off of how, each child is worth this sounds horrible, but like you get a certain amount of money for each child, right? And so that 368 is our number, and if we're below that, we've luckily been not held liable for losing money if we go. Well, our enrollment has been healthy and steady. I did stop enrolling this year under our enrollment because I know that we're not going to be affected by budget cuts because of our transportation issue. So we were able to like stop at 27, and if I could, I would, right? But I can't guarantee that every year. But a way you guys could help and support is, I know I forward this to my LSC members, but there are community meetings around budget. And that's something like if I could advocate for two things, it would be a case manager at every school dedicated that doesn't come out of our school budget. Because if we had that, we could release and hire more classroom intervention or acceleration. And then this transportation, like we've got to get transportation back. Because I think that is an equity piece for me in terms of like access to the school, and so.
Attendance and that kind of stuff.
Right.
Certainly.
Right. We have, I think, maybe 4 kids that get busing. It's because of this year it was only if students had it written as a related service in their IEP. So not even if you had an IEP, but it's like has to be written as a service that's in there, or for our families that are might be in temporary living situations.
Right. Yeah.
The other thing.
Keep rolling.
You mentioned about the safe, like creating a safe environment in the school and like the mental health component, and having the kids who need additional support be able to access that support. One of the things that I'm wondering about in terms of support structures is not just for the kids who are experiencing things that feel unsafe or that are aggravating mental health or mental wellness dynamics, but also for the kids who are perpetrating those things, who are creating unsafe spaces, who are maybe saying things or doing things that are creating that. What kind of support structures are being put in place to address those, not just the people who feel harmed?
Oh yeah, no, and when you say that, it reminds me of. Like when you say that, it reminds me of like maybe it's an instance of bullying or, bias-based harm, right? So there are systems in CPS when those kind of things happen. There's certain things that trigger a different kind of response in the student code of conduct. Bias-based harm is one of them. So if the child's using like inappropriate language, or if they are saying something that is racially, sexually, religious-based, like the identity is charged in that way, we do have to report that to the Office of Student Protections, and there's like an investigation process. There's a whole support plan that comes from that too. So sometimes there might be a need for what's called like a safety plan, which is separation. But in that safety plan, there's sections where we support, and this is not just for bias-based, it's also for bullying behaviors. So if kids are showing bullying behaviors, it's almost always the child who's engaging in those behaviors is also very much hurting and needs like support, whether it be from social work or whether it be from, just like when we say interventions on an academic sense, you also can do that with social emotional learning. Right. So it could be like a check-in, check-out with our counselor. We will a lot of times like offer families different resources that they can go to for to get individual counseling for their students. We're in a partnership right now with Lutheran Social Services, which is it's a not-for-profit that offers one-on-one counseling. We have about 10 spots for kids. It's been kind of difficult with that. We'll see if we stick with them or if we have a different one. But like really engaging community partners for those tier like 3 level things. But there's also things that we as admin do, like I just saw Barrera the other day working with some kids and like a restore, like it's a lesson, right? A series of lessons that we're going to sit and talk about. Right now, and then if we see multiple kind of things happening, like this is we have like a couple of repeated incidents of kids joking around using bias-based language as a means to like either connect with each other or experimenting socially. And so when you see a lot of that, then that to us indicates like there's a tier 1 need for something. Like there needs to be some more education around some things. So it's a combination of consequences. We don't say zero tolerance though, because that's kind of based in this punitive system where it's like if you do that, you get suspended, which if somebody's already engaging in bullying behaviors are probably not feeling terribly connected to school or their peers anyway. And so then we're just gonna see them out of school and make it worse, right? So it really depends. Like I think that you can't take it like it's not like if this happens and this happens. So, but what we always commit to is getting to the bottom of a situation. There's a lot of time, energy that goes into talking to kids and things, and so getting their perspective, listening to that will help inform us on the process we need to have with the parents. And engaging people always really important too. So, so there's a response we had like in middle school. I think all of you have done the 8th grade. So at the beginning of the year, we did like a little uptick and had 2 or 3 in a couple of maybe 2 months period bias harm incidents. We've been working, and then also first play, like kids just smacking each other and then not getting into too big of a deal. Those are kind of 2 behaviors we've seen in an uptick. And one of the things that we're doing is, well, first of all, we survey the kids. We think this is a problem. Do you perceive this as a problem? When we talk to you, don't think it's a problem. And so for both of those targeted behaviors, really surveying got their perspective, showed them the survey results that yes, many of your peers do think this is not a problem and don't like what's happening. We had like a short assembly, and then we're working with the team, the middle school team, to do some admin teaching. I'm calling it student seed, because we're pulling some of the seed stuff and doing it with the kids in the classroom, but we're also using, there's a really great resource called Teaching for Justice, and it's got like social justice standards. So we're pulling some different resources together, but again, like we gotta be, it's this, I kind of got to see what the needs are and then just be flexible and pivot and bring people with you when you're doing it.
Right.
Can you talk a little more about the short assembly? I've heard a little bit about short assembly.
Yeah. Well, we did. So we led with talking about the sense of we're all connected. We showed a picture of and we're interdependent, like what we say matters and it affects each other. You know, we affect one another. We act. So we started with that. And then we went through just the policies around bullying and bias-based harm and went through the definitions of things. We showed them the results from the survey, which again, the survey wasn't necessarily focused. We actually have not had as much bullying at this, like we're at the end of quarter 1 right now, and a couple of instances of reported, but nothing that has been like founded yet. So I would say bullying for us at this point in the year has seemed down, but the bias-based language is still continuing on a lower. Again, I say low level because it's what comes to us, but what we think is like, okay, if it's happening once every couple of weeks, then there's probably a bigger problem here that we want to make sure that we're supporting our kids through. And so we, you know, when we did the assembly, supporting them with, we brought it up on the climate team. The team talked about doing the survey, giving it back to the kids, but we also had a member of like a network support who was in there with us, and they actually connected us with a really cool resource. The Office of Student Corrections does training on belonging for students and for teachers, and goes, or not for teachers, parents, and goes through those policies as well. So it was kind of setting it up for like framing, you know, this matters, this is important, you see this as a problem, we see this as a problem. Going through our quarterly incentive plan with the kids too, I think was something important to do, and explaining the difference between the kinds of behaviors like office managed versus classroom managed. We had got feedback that kids or parents, for whatever reason, wanted to make sure that that was clear. And then I'm trying to remember, it was 2 or 3 weeks ago. Yeah, we ended with kind of keying up what we're doing now with the student seed. So really focusing on identity and belonging. So today, like I was in Robertson's class today, we did the windows and mirrors lesson with the 3 different pieces of art, but like slowing it down for the kids, you know, because I think in middle school, wanted to make sure that we're building that language of things like windows and mirrors, and not necessarily going as deep as we would in our sessions together all at one time. We don't have that kind of time with kids, and you kind of want to scaffold back a little bit. So kind of dabbling with that, and then eventually moving towards like empowering kids with the language that we use in SEED, and adjusting with like grade level appropriate stuff for middle school. So. So can I give you an example? So like on a chat room, kid using like a slur about, you know, folks who are identified as Jewish, you know, or you know, having a situation where class somebody uses the N-word and it's not appropriate, right? Like it wasn't, that's something that you just don't do in school, right? And so like having that be used by somebody and then somebody feeling, hearing it, uncomfortable about it, or having, I don't think we've ever had that word necessarily being used towards somebody, but using it, talking about it. Or, well, it's not all just racial. Yeah, racial slurs, or like using the word gay.
Or sizes.
Yeah.
Any kind of words that would be offensive.
Or like saying like that's so gay, or that looks gay, you know, like that's a big deal, right? Like that's not appropriate, you know. So those kind of things, like not just brushing over that, you know, like that's, I think that, you know, and I think, well, it's CPS language, but it's implemented differently across schools. You know what I'm saying? Like the policy is you report, you meet with families. I think that the challenge is making sure that not just as a building we're implementing that consistently, but that like, you know, I think from school to school, like I've heard folks that don't do half of what we do whenever we hear that kind of thing and that kind of response. But I think it goes back to our mission or vision and we are as Franklin. Like, we are a beautifully diverse school, right? And so I think that when kids get in middle school, there is like a certain amount of grade level of developmental appropriateness to like experimenting with social stuff or to try to like push the boundary a little bit. But I think it's our job as educators to teach those boundaries and to teach children how to take that perspective of others and understand what they've caused harm regardless of their intent. You know, so I think that when we've got families that come from all over and have all different kinds of backgrounds, that we have an opportunity to really teach into a lot of stuff that if we were in a school that was more heterogeneous or homogeneous. Sorry, help me. I'm struggling. Homogeneous. Thank you. Homogeneous might not have that opportunity, you know. So
That part, I just want to know.
Yeah.
The actual definition, because saying. I don't understand what you mean if you say
Yeah.
somebody's place. So I'm trying to figure out how to say it to them.
yeah, it is
This is what it means.
for sure. Will you journey with me? I'm gonna. Let me see. I'm using this new app called Melon, and it's really cool because I've gotten feedback from LSCs, you can't see my slides. And so it's a slide-based thing. But if we look at the students' code of conduct, that's the struggle with it. That's how it's like listed in there. And it's kind of like we have to translate it to the kiddos because you bring up a really great point. Like, that's kind of education jargony, and it doesn't necessarily, like, sometimes kids will joke with that stuff, and then the kid who's getting it on the receiving end, no, it's okay. No, it's not okay. And that was really.
If you say something I understand,
Mhm.
oh, okay, and then they don't say okay, so you know what I mean?
Right.
Right.
Right. Ugh. Well, the student code of conduct is not formatted properly, so. Here we go.
You talk to them, you're asking the questions.
So if you look at this, I'm going to show folks who are share screen. I understand.
You say the questions.
Yeah, the question was, how do we teach children bias-based, like in layman terms, what is it? But I'm pulling this up because I want to highlight kind of where it comes from. As much as possible, we try to pull and align with the student code of conduct. And so it's kind of outlined here. And this is what we, would share with our students, did share with them. It's any physical, verbal, or nonverbal or other acts, including communications made writing or electronically, directed towards a member or perceived member of a protected category within the school community that is of discriminatory or harmful nature. Right. So that's the, that definition. And then when we talk about bullying, the thing we went over with the students was, a lot of times it's problematic when we use the word bullying colloquially to describe just like conflict, because it waters down bullying in the like the true definition sense. So we share with the kids. I know the teachers did at the beginning of the year, but just so we're all on the same page, like bullying typically has the 4 areas of power imbalance, perceived over time, although it doesn't have to be. It can be one big thing, but it needs to be substantial in terms of like the intent, the harm that was caused. The intent of the person is to cause physical, emotional harm, and that has these predicted effects. So, that's whatever there is a case of bullying, regardless of, if somebody reports it, it can be parent, student, teacher, administrator, anybody reports it, it triggers a process. And then it's our job as a school to like gather statements and make the best, align the evidence with like what this is. If it aligns with the definition, then we would change the approach and how we deal with it. So like with bullying, it's about safety and separation. You wouldn't want to do restorative with bullying. Like it's really about, okay, these people are going to have a plan. We're teachers, parents, make sure that there's a good deal of faith and support from both ends. And then in terms of the, eventually like over a longer period of time, bringing families back together around that. So, or not families, bringing the students. But really, because this can be so harmful and severe, and the consequences are really serious when there is bullying, in terms of like how it affects the children, the young people, it is all about safety when it comes to fitting into this definition. And so, yeah, that's just where I'm from. I wanted to raise that. There goes my phone.
It does make me wonder when you said like observed bullying. Bullying is designed not to be observed. Right? It's like kids who are in harm are intentionally doing it in a way that is not observable.
Mhm.
It makes it very difficult to speak out for the child that's being targeted. What do you have in place so that someone who feels harmed by the behavior can report it in a way that is safe, or that creates a sense of this is a safe place to report it, or something like that we're going to be supported versus just so that was a one-off incident, or that was like, or the principal, there's really bad harm that they didn't intend it. Like so many ways that behavior can be brushed off. Because of the way that it's designed, is there, whether it's bullying, whether it's biased language use or whatever, it can be very uncomfortable and difficult for the student to bring it forward.
Mhm.
So is there a way to communicate that is not like that we feel safe rather than inflammatory and inflammatory, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think what's key there is the education piece, so that it's not just somebody reporting it, but like educators, parents, kids being able to identify what's happening to them, or yes, this is happening to my, like, again, anybody can report it, and it's just a simple email to a teacher, email to any person that works here, and then it triggers the process.
And we're also looking to say there are that's messaging that I know we put out there often. We paint signs in the bathrooms of how to report things. That they can take different venues. They can either go see this private or come see me, or go talk to this doctor. We even tell kids, please, this is my email. You don't have to say anything. And I hope most know I will never do any kind of investigation as far as someone that's on the report something. I will get a very large amount of eyes that could possibly be in the vicinity, maybe possibly heard something, or maybe an offsite and it was a part of a party or something like that. So I think the kids know the culture here is there's a lot of talking that happens when a report comes in, something like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's one of the things for now.
Yeah. No, thanks for that's a good question even for the folks that are watching. So thank you for asking those. All right. Any other questions?
Is it CPS you said about funding for transportation?
Mhm.
CPS?
It's So it was sent out to local councils. But I believe, and I kind of want to double check now that it just came up, because it would be nice if we could get more parents there even advocating for those things. Yeah, the case management is,
That's supposed to be the Catholic credit contract for like 2025, and every school is supposed to have a case manager.
That's already.
Well, yeah, so it's a nurse. We know nurses are supposed to be by that, so. we're hoping.
it's just, I think, and it might be my reality right now because I'm more in it, because I'm doing it, but it is really complex and it is really important because it's something that it's not just like paper pushing, like it's really helping to control how we label kids that might affect, the rest of their academic career. So it has to be based on data, not just like a feeling or a perceived want or something like that.
Well, I mean, I guess the other thing that I wonder with that is if there's like, one of the fears often is that it's going to escalate, that it's going to make things worse or whatever.
Oh, you're talking about bullying. I was talking about,
Right.
I was on management. I was like, I'm like, what's your Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, but I guess that's also what I was wondering is like maybe you don't have to escalate it to bullying. Maybe something can be caught before it's like a
Right.
common issue and it can be addressed sooner, but we don't want to create an inflammatory situation where it makes anything worse for anybody and the media can be engaged
Mhm.
differently, like again with the mental health support, mental wellness support.
And that,
There's something going on here. I'm feeling impacted by this. Like,
and I'm gonna get back to that idea of tier one. If we are really focusing on building strong relationships in classroom communities, then the thing we talked about in assembly, like we affect what we say matters and affects each other. We are interdependent. We don't just operate in vacuums here at Franklin. And so I think continuing to develop teachers to be able to do that for their kids and kids to be able to engage in that in an authentic way is like, to me, the biggest mode of prevention, because then we're family. You see that happening if we feel a strong connection as a classroom community. There's not shame around doing that. There's not shame standing up for somebody because we're connected by strong and positive relationships. That being said, it still happens in schools, right? So where I think sometimes we in education will really focus on like treating a symptom of something rather than the root cause. And so I think with bullying and with kind of behaviors, the root cause is either like not as strong of relationships as we would like to have in classrooms, in terms of like students to each other, students feeling connected to the classroom community, and teachers. It's hard. I mean, teaching is tough. It's not just about the content. Like, we as educators are also responsible for creating those spaces, and so it's not just about reading, writing, math, literacy. Like, it is about the culture we create in our classrooms. And I know I didn't go to school for that when I was becoming a teacher. So it's about that. As we're learning more about the importance of that in education, we've got to keep up with how we support our teachers, not just with development, but the time. The resource of time is the most precious. I swear, if you could ask the teachers, like, give me $100 or give me like an hour of prep time, like it would be an hour of prep time, right? Like it's so valuable to just have that time to be able to sit and plan with one another. School is so fast paced. It's kind of like it's a different world in schools because things just don't stop. And so we got to protect teachers' time and ability to just sit and reflect and grow, because that's what's taking us to the next level, is investing in those kind of things for teachers so that they can do well by the students. And I'm really confident in this stuff. I'm so happy with the CIWB the way it came out. I'm really excited about that Lozano stuff we're doing, and the diversity and inclusion. So we'll see. We'll see if it shows up in the data next year. Part of me is like, oh man, we're really high right now. Hopefully we can stay and maintain. But I think the way we maintain this by looking at those subgroups and then keep continuing to push the rigor to get that proficiency up. So that's where we're at. The school. That's the state of the school. State of the school. Right? All right, y'all. Well, any other questions? Or, all right, I'm going to go ahead and say bye to the folks on YouTube. Thank you for tuning in to our channel in the state of the school. We'll see you guys later. Have a good night.